It was supposed to be an ordinary evening, the kind where a 4-year-old girl tucks herself into bed, where parents share laughs over dinner with friends, and where their loyal dog, Canine Spike, lies quietly at the door, always watching, always waiting. But in the Reed household, nothing would ever be the same again. Olivia's soft giggle echoed down the hallway as she played with her favorite stuffed bear, nestled in her cozy pink bedroom. Outside, the wind whistled through the trees, but inside, the house was warm and alive with the sounds of family. Sarah, Olivia's mother, adjusted the tablecloth, making sure everything was perfect for their guests. Michael, Olivia's father, leaned over his wife's shoulder, fixing the last of the glasses for their dinner party. They were celebrating a rare night of togetherness with close friends. Nothing out of the ordinary, nothing to worry about. Or so they thought. Spike, their protective German shepherd, paced in the living room, his gaze never wavering from the windows. He wasn't just any dog. He had been trained in military-grade protection, and he had a deep, almost supernatural connection to Olivia. He could sense things that weren't right, things that were about to break, and that evening something was. The doorbell rang, signaling the arrival of guests. Olivia's voice rang out, "Uncle Danny's here!" She loved when her Uncle Daniel came over. He was always so much fun, always had something to say that made her giggle. But Sarah and Michael's smiles were brief. Daniel had been distant, unpredictable since returning to the family. He hadn't been around much, not after all the years of being away from them. But family was family, and they were doing their best to welcome him back with open arms. What could go wrong? As Daniel stepped into the house, his eyes lingered a little too long on Olivia. The smile he gave her wasn't one of a loving uncle. It was cold, calculating. A shiver ran down Sarah's spine, but she brushed it off. Maybe it was just her imagination. After all, they were hosting a dinner for their closest friends, and the night should have been filled with joy. But Spike felt it too. His ears perked as Daniel passed by. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. There was something off, something wrong. Spike wasn't used to feeling this way, but he knew. And for the first time, he felt the unease settle into his bones. A few hours passed. The dinner party was lively, and the clinking of glasses filled the air. Laughter echoed through the house. But despite the warmth, despite the chatter, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Daniel had been strangely silent, his eyes darting from person to person, always lingering too long on Olivia. When he thought no one was watching, his gaze would fall to the ground as if deep in thought. And that uneasy feeling in Michael's stomach wouldn't let go. Then a loud crash shattered the peace of the evening. It came from upstairs. Sarah froze. Michael's heart leapt into his throat. Spike was the first to react. He bolted up the stairs before anyone could move, his powerful legs pounding against the wooden floor. Olivia screamed, and then the sound of frantic footsteps, muffled voices, and the unmistakable shuffle of a struggle. Michael's legs moved before he could process it, but by the time he reached the door, Spike was already inside. The sight that met Michael's eyes was almost too much to comprehend. Daniel, his own brother, was standing over Olivia, his hands wrapped around the girl's tiny arms, pulling her toward the window. Olivia was kicking and screaming, her eyes wild with fear. But it wasn't just her fear that hit Michael like a truck. It was the look on Daniel's face, the cold, indifferent expression that he'd worn so many times over the years, like he was doing something he had no choice in. And then Spike lunged. The force of the impact was enough to knock Daniel off his feet. Spike didn't bark. He didn't growl. He was pure instinct. He was protection, loyalty, and love all rolled into one. He pinned Daniel to the floor, holding him there, his powerful jaws hovering just above his face. Olivia ran into Michael's arms, crying uncontrollably, but it wasn't just the terror of the moment that made her so afraid. It was the realization of what she'd just seen. The uncle she loved had just tried to take her away from her family. As Michael held Olivia tightly, he couldn't understand. Why would Daniel do this? How could someone so close, someone he trusted, betray them like this? There were no answers, only questions, and for the first time, Michael understood the truth. the truth he would never have believed if he hadn't seen it with his own eyes. Before the police arrived and took Daniel away, Michael found something strange in Daniel's jacket. A letter. A letter that would change everything. But what it said, he couldn't even begin to understand. Was it possible? Could someone within their family have planned this? How long had the betrayal been brewing? Before we go any further, don't forget to subscribe to the Heroes for Animals channel. You'll find more gripping, emotional, and heartwarming stories of canine heroes like Spike, who change lives every day. The investigation into the events that transpired that night was only beginning. Michael knew that there were far darker secrets to uncover, secrets that had been buried beneath years of family loyalty, love, and trust. But as the investigation unfolded, Michael realized that some truths would forever be hidden in the shadows. The days following Olivia's rescue were a blur. Michael and Sarah, though relieved to have their daughter safe, were drowning in a sea of confusion and disbelief. The sight of Daniel standing over Olivia, attempting to drag her away from the only home she had ever known, was enough to shatter their perception of the world. How could it have come to this? The police investigation was swift, but the answers they were searching for didn't come easily. Daniel had been arrested and charged with attempted kidnapping, but that was just the surface. Michael knew deep down that something much darker was at play. The pieces didn't fit, and the more he thought about it, the more questions he had. Why hadn't Daniel made a move sooner? Why wait until now? And why Olivia? He was her uncle. He should have been protecting her, not planning her abduction. Spike, ever the protector, stayed close to Olivia, refusing to leave her side for even a second. His loyalty was unwavering, but his instincts were clear. Something wasn't right, and it wasn't just about the kidnapping. It was about the deeper connection between Daniel and the family, one that Michael hadn't fully understood until now. 2 days after Daniel's arrest, Michael couldn't sit idle anymore. He knew that there was more to uncover, and the only way to find answers was to look into the past. He spent hours digging through old family records, photographs, and journals. It wasn't long before he stumbled upon something that made his blood run cold. A letter hidden in the back of an old photo album that had been tucked away in the attic. The letter was dated over a decade ago, written by Daniel himself. The contents weren't clear at first, but Michael's hands trembled as he read it. The letter spoke of betrayal, of greed, and of a deep-seated resentment that had festered for years. It was a confession, though not in the typical sense. Daniel had been planning to take control of the Reed family fortune, something he believed was rightfully his. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. The most unsettling part of the letter was the final sentence. Olivia is the key to everything. If I can get to her, I can finally take what is mine. Michael froze. His heart pounded in his chest as the realization hit him like a ton of bricks. Daniel hadn't just planned to kidnap Olivia for ransom or revenge. He had been setting the stage for something much more calculated. For years, Daniel had quietly manipulated situations within the family, slowly distancing himself from everyone. He had carefully constructed a web of lies, always waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But why Olivia? Why had he chosen her? The answer came in the form of a small, old journal belonging to Sarah. As Michael flipped through the pages, he discovered something that made his stomach twist. Sarah had once been a part of a legal team overseeing the family's estate. Olivia, as it turned out, was not just a child in the Reed family. She was the heir to a significant portion of the family's wealth, something Michael had never fully realized. Her inheritance, which was hidden under layers of legal protection, was something that could change everything for Daniel. That was when Michael understood. It wasn't just about Olivia. It was about power. Daniel had been scheming for years, trying to manipulate his way into the Reed family's fortune. Olivia's kidnapping had been his way of forcing the family to hand over control of the estate. But the more Michael thought about it, the more confused he became. Why hadn't Daniel just come forward and demanded what he wanted? Why resort to something so extreme? The answer, Michael soon discovered, was rooted in betrayal that ran deeper than he ever could have imagined. Daniel wasn't just angry with Michael or Sarah. He was angry with the entire family. The Reed family had always been close-knit, loyal to one another in ways that others could only envy. But beneath that surface, Michael learned, there had been tension, animosity, and resentment bubbling for years. Daniel had always felt left behind, overlooked, and ignored. He had convinced himself that he was entitled to the family's wealth, to the legacy that seemed to be slipping further and further away from him. As Michael pieced everything together, the full weight of the situation came crashing down. It wasn't just about a single betrayal. It was about a lifetime of bitterness, of secrets hidden in plain sight. Daniel had believed he could outsmart the family, that he could force them into a position where they had no choice but to hand over control of everything. But there was one thing he hadn't counted on: the loyalty of his niece and the protection of Spike. The night Olivia had been kidnapped, Spike had sensed something was off long before anyone else did. He had been by her side, watching over her as always, but something in the air had shifted. His instincts had been spot on, and it was Spike's quick action that saved Olivia. But even now, after Daniel had been apprehended, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that there were still pieces of the puzzle missing. Over the next few days, Michael met with Sarah, trying to piece together any loose ends. He couldn't stop thinking about the letter, about how it painted a portrait of a man he thought he knew. He had always thought of Daniel as a family member, someone who had simply fallen out of touch, but now he realized the depth of his brother's envy and bitterness. The family they thought they knew had been a lie, woven with deception, jealousy, and betrayal. One evening, as Michael sat alone in the living room, flipping through the family's old photo albums, his mind kept returning to one question: how long had Daniel been planning this? It wasn't just about Olivia's inheritance, it was about breaking the family. Daniel had wanted to destroy everything they stood for, to tear apart the bonds that held them together. He had done it so quietly, so cleverly, that no one had even suspected a thing until it was too late. The walls around Michael seemed to close in as he thought about the betrayal that had unfolded in his own home. How could they have missed the signs? How could they have trusted someone who had been plotting against them all along? And yet, there was still one thing that kept Michael grounded: the thought of Olivia, safe in his arms, and the fierce loyalty of Spike. Despite everything, despite the secrets and lies, they still had each other. They were still a family. But the truth, as Michael was learning, was more complicated than he ever could have imagined. And as much as he wanted to believe that the worst was over, he knew deep down that the true cost of Daniel's betrayal was only just beginning to unfold. The days after Olivia's near abduction passed in a haze of confusion, disbelief, and lingering fear. Michael and Sarah were slowly piecing together the fragments of a shattered family, trying to make sense of the chaos that Daniel had created. They were forever changed by the events, but the question still lingered. Why had Daniel done this? Why had he gone so far to tear their family apart? Michael couldn't shake the feeling that the investigation wasn't over. Yes, Daniel was behind bars, and the police were looking into his connections, but something wasn't sitting right with him. It was too clean, too easy. Daniel's actions didn't add up. There had to be more to the story. Spike, who had remained glued to Olivia's side since the rescue, was the only source of comfort for the girl. His presence was a steady reminder of the heroism that had kept her safe. But Michael could see that Olivia was still shaken. The fear in her eyes didn't go away, not even with Spike lying next to her, his large head resting protectively on her tiny lap. She'd lost her innocence that night. Something inside her had changed, and Michael knew it wasn't something that could be fixed overnight, no matter how much he wished it could. Sarah, too, was struggling. She kept her distance from Daniel's arrest, her focus remaining solely on Olivia. But when the days grew quiet, Sarah found herself rummaging through old boxes in the attic, trying to piece together the past. Something, some small detail, kept tugging at her memory. Something about Daniel's sudden return that didn't feel right. Why now? Why after all these years? It wasn't until Sarah found a box filled with old family papers that she understood. Hidden among them was an envelope, yellowed with age. She hesitated, knowing it was something her mother had kept hidden for years. But the more Sarah thought about it, the more she realized there was no point in ignoring it any longer. She had to know. She opened the envelope. The letter inside was dated over 20 years ago when Sarah was just a teenager. Her mother had written it, but it was addressed to her father, her beloved husband. The letter described the family's troubles, financial issues that were kept hidden from the children. Sarah had always known the Reed family was wealthy, but she hadn't known the dark side of it, the hidden debts, the strained business deals, the shady dealings in the background. But it wasn't just the financial troubles that made Sarah's heart race. The letter detailed a conversation Sarah's mother had overheard between Daniel and their father. In it, Daniel had talked about his discontent with the family, his desire to take over the business, and his bitterness toward Michael for always being the golden child. It was clear from the letter that Daniel had always felt like an outsider, neglected and forgotten, while Michael got all the attention and praise. It was no surprise that, when Daniel had returned, he'd done so with an agenda. As Sarah read further, she found a shocking revelation. Her mother had believed that Daniel was behind a string of business sabotage attempts years ago. A series of mysterious events had damaged the family's business, but no one had ever been able to connect the dots. Now, reading the letter, Sarah saw the pieces fall into place. Daniel's jealousy had festered for years, and his return to the family had been no coincidence. Michael, meanwhile, was determined to confront Daniel, to find out everything he could. The police had said they were still investigating, but Michael knew that Daniel wouldn't reveal the truth easily. He had to do this on his own. After a tense phone call with Daniel's lawyer, Michael was granted a visit. It wasn't just about answering questions anymore. It was about finding closure, about understanding why his own brother had betrayed him, their family, and everything they had built. When Michael entered the interrogation room, Daniel didn't look surprised. He sat there, his hands folded on the table, looking as calm as ever. But there was something in his eyes, something that hinted at a deeper frustration. It was clear that he didn't plan to make things easy. "You're wasting your time, Michael," Daniel said, his voice flat. "You won. You got the business. You got everything. But that's all you'll ever get." Michael's jaw clenched. "Why, Daniel? Why go this far? Olivia? How could you do that to her, to the family?" Daniel's lips twisted into a sardonic smile. "The family? You think this family is any different from any other? It's all a lie. You all sit there pretending like everything is fine, like everything is perfect, but it's not. You think I haven't seen the cracks in the walls? You think I haven't felt the cold stares, the judgment?" Michael sat down across from Daniel, his fists clenched. "This isn't about us, Daniel. This is about you. You wanted it all, but at what cost?" Daniel leaned forward, his voice low. "I was never good enough for you, for Sarah, for Mom and Dad. You and Sarah always got the spotlight, the praise. No one ever gave me a chance. So yeah, I did what I had to do. I planned everything. I knew exactly how to break you. I knew how to make you fall." Michael's mind raced. All these years, he had thought Daniel had simply drifted away from the family, but this was more than that. This wasn't just about inheritance or business deals. This was about deep-rooted resentment, years of bitterness that had poisoned Daniel's soul. Michael had been blind to it, and now the truth was staring him in the face. "But Olivia?" Michael asked, his voice hoarse. "You were willing to hurt a child? My daughter?" Daniel's eyes darkened. "She was the key. The only way to get what I wanted. You never understood how much I wanted to be a part of this family. I thought if I could just get what was mine, I could finally be free of all this. But I never planned on you coming in to stop me." The room fell silent, the weight of Daniel's words sinking in. Michael sat back, his mind trying to process everything. Olivia wasn't just a pawn in a game of family politics. She had been the target of a deep-seated desire for power. Daniel had seen her as a key to taking control, not just of the family business, but of everything Michael had built. It was clear now that Olivia had been a victim of Daniel's selfish ambition. But there was one thing Michael knew for sure. He would protect his family no matter the cost. Olivia was safe now, and Spike had ensured she would never face danger alone again. But the battle for trust, for the family's future, was far from over. Michael couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was far from over. Yes, Daniel had been arrested, but the truth wasn't just about getting him off the streets. There were more layers to this betrayal, and as hard as it was to face, Michael knew he had to peel them away. Olivia had been through something none of them should have had to witness, but it was the secrets buried in their family history that now haunted Michael. He couldn't let it go. He had to know everything, no matter how painful. Days after his conversation with Daniel in the interrogation room, Michael found himself sitting alone in the living room, staring at the stack of family papers in front of him. The weight of them was almost overwhelming. These weren't just legal documents or photographs. These were pieces of the family's legacy, moments that had been tucked away in dusty boxes for years, hiding the truth of who they really were. Michael flipped through the pages one by one, each one revealing more than he'd expected. Some were from years before he was even born, others from the last decade when Daniel had made his return to the family. But it wasn't until he stumbled across one particular letter, hidden beneath old legal contracts, that the pieces really started to fall into place. It was a letter from his mother written the year before she passed away. It was addressed to Michael's father, but something about the tone of the letter caught his attention. The words were far more revealing than anything he had ever expected. "Michael," the letter began, "you've always been the one to hold this family together. But there's something you need to know, something that has been buried for far too long. I know you love Daniel, but I'm afraid his path has been set by a deeper force than you can understand. He's angry, resentful, and blind to the love we've all tried to give him. I fear one day it will be too late." Michael's hands began to shake as he read the rest of the letter, the words growing darker and more unsettling with each sentence. His mother had known. She had seen the change in Daniel before anyone else had. She had known that his resentment was deeper than sibling rivalry. She had feared that Daniel's anger would destroy everything. But what Michael didn't understand was why it had taken so long for her to tell him. Why hadn't she done something sooner? As he sat there, staring at the letter, his mind raced with unanswered questions. Why hadn't they all seen the signs? How had Daniel hidden his bitterness for so long? Suddenly, he was no longer just angry at Daniel for his actions. He was angry at the entire family for being so blind to the toxicity that had been simmering beneath the surface for decades. Daniel wasn't the only one who had failed Olivia. They had all failed to see the cracks forming in the foundation of their family. And now it was too late. The letter continued, revealing that Daniel had, in fact, been the mastermind behind the series of financial setbacks that had plagued the family business in recent years. It wasn't just a coincidence that every major deal had fallen through when Daniel had been around. His mother had known all along that Daniel had been manipulating things behind the scenes, quietly sabotaging the business to force Michael and Sarah to hand over control. Michael's head spun as he read the words. How could Daniel have been so calculating, so cold? And worse, how had they missed it? How had they not seen that their own flesh and blood had been orchestrating their downfall all along? But there was more. As Michael dug deeper into the old family records, he found something that shook him to his core, financial records that revealed a series of transactions, money flowing from Daniel's private accounts to offshore banks, accounts that Michael had never known existed. It was clear that Daniel had been planning this for much longer than anyone realized. His intentions were never about family or reconciliation. He had been plotting this for years, setting up his plan to take what he believed was his by any means necessary. But why had he involved Olivia? What did she have to do with it? The answer came when Michael found a series of handwritten notes tucked into one of the folders. These notes, written by Daniel, spoke about his plans to take Olivia as a leverage point, someone who could force Michael into submission. Olivia wasn't just a victim in Daniel's eyes. She was a tool, a way to make Michael bend to his will. The horror of it hit Michael all at once. Olivia wasn't just targeted because she was vulnerable. She had been chosen because she was the key to everything. Daniel had seen her as an opportunity, a way to control the family, to break Michael and take the legacy that he felt he deserved. It was never about Olivia's inheritance. It was about control. It always had been. Michael stood up suddenly, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. He paced around the room trying to process the weight of the revelations. He had spent so long protecting his family, believing that their love would be enough to overcome any obstacle. But now he understood the truth. There were people in their lives who had been silently working against them, pulling the strings from the shadows. His first instinct was to call Sarah, but he hesitated. He knew this was going to tear her apart. She had been so focused on healing Olivia, so focused on keeping her safe, that Michael wasn't sure how she would handle this truth. She had always believed in the best of Daniel, just as he had. Now, everything they had believed was shattered. Spike, who had been sitting quietly by the door, suddenly stood and walked over to Michael. His presence was calming, grounding as always. Michael reached down to pet him, the weight of everything pressing in on him. "We'll figure this out," Michael muttered, his voice filled with a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. He wasn't sure how they were going to fix this, but he knew one thing for sure. They couldn't let Daniel win. They couldn't let him destroy everything they had fought for. But there was a bigger question now, one that Michael couldn't shake. What was Daniel planning next? The police had arrested him, but that didn't mean he was done. This was just the beginning, and Michael had no intention of letting Daniel tear apart their family any further. As Michael sat back down, his thoughts turned to Olivia. She was still so young, so innocent, but the events of the past few days had left scars that wouldn't fade quickly. He had failed to protect her from the darkness that had been brewing in their family, but he wouldn't fail again. Not now. Spike looked up at him, his eyes steady and unwavering. The bond between them had always been strong, but now it felt unbreakable. They were in this together, and Michael knew that as long as he had Spike by his side, they could face whatever came next. The day Michael finally sat down with Sarah to go over everything felt like the weight of the world was on his shoulders. He had hoped, even prayed, that somehow they could avoid this conversation, but deep down he knew it was inevitable. The truth was ugly, and it was something neither of them could deny any longer. Daniel's betrayal wasn't just about money or power, it was about family, about trust, and how quickly it could all be shattered. The house felt eerily quiet as Michael sat across from Sarah in the kitchen, the place that had always been the heart of their home. The table was set, but no one was eating. The silence between them was heavier than any words could express. Olivia was playing quietly in the next room, with Spike by her side, ever watchful, ever loyal. Michael had tried to shield Sarah from the deeper truths he'd uncovered, but there was no other choice now. They had to face this together. And as much as it broke his heart, Michael knew that his wife deserved to know everything. "I found something," Michael began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Something in the family files, something from Mom." Sarah's eyes flickered with curiosity, but she said nothing. She'd been distant lately, lost in her own thoughts, trying to protect Olivia from the fallout of all that had happened. But Michael could see the hurt in her eyes, the confusion, the lingering pain from everything Daniel had done. "Mom knew, Sarah. She knew what Daniel was planning all along. She tried to warn me," Michael continued, his voice thick with emotion. "She knew he wasn't just angry at me or the business. She knew he was after something deeper." Sarah's face fell as she processed the words. She had always known that Daniel harbored resentment, but she had never imagined it would go this far. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What are you saying, Michael?" Michael slid the letter he had found across the table to her, his hand shaking as he did so. Sarah took it, her fingers brushing against his as she unfolded the yellowed paper. She began reading, and as she did, her face went pale. Michael watched her closely, his heart aching for her, but knowing this was something they both had to understand. "I never wanted to hurt you, Sarah. I never wanted to hurt this family," the letter from Michael's mother read. "But I see now, too late, that Daniel's path is set. I'm afraid it's too far gone. There's nothing we can do to stop him anymore." Sarah's hand shook as she finished reading. She put the letter down slowly, as though the words on the page were too heavy to bear. "So Mom knew about his intentions?" Her voice cracked with the realization. Michael nodded solemnly. "Yes, she knew, and she was afraid of what he was capable of. She thought he might try to tear this family apart, but she didn't want to believe it. None of us did. Sarah's mind raced. She felt betrayed by her own brother, but she also felt a sense of guilt. How had she not seen it? How had she not recognized the signs in Daniel's behavior? But then again, Daniel had been so good at hiding his true intentions. He had played the part of the charming, loving brother for so long that no one suspected the bitterness festering inside him. "That's not all," Michael added, his voice tight. "I found financial records. Daniel has been sabotaging the business for years. He's been manipulating the books, pushing the family's wealth to the brink of collapse. And there's more. He's been secretly siphoning money into offshore accounts. He's been planning this for a long time." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't comprehend it. How could Daniel, the brother she had once adored, the uncle who had played with Olivia, have done something so cruel? It was impossible to reconcile the man she thought she knew with the person Michael was describing.
"He wanted to destroy everything, Sarah,"
Michael said, his voice barely above a whisper.
"He wanted to take control of everything.
Olivia's inheritance wasn't just about money. It was his way of breaking us. He thought if he could control her, if he could manipulate the family's legacy, he could finally take what he believed was rightfully his." Sarah's hands went to her face, the tears finally flowing freely.
"He was willing to hurt Olivia? My baby? For money?"
Michael reached across the table and took her hands in his own eyes filled with grief.
"Yes, Sarah.
He saw her as a means to an end. She was just a pawn in his game." Sarah sat back in her chair, her mind spinning. The betrayal was worse than she could have ever imagined. But what hurt the most was the thought that Daniel had been planning this for years, and no one had seen it coming. For a moment they both sat there in silence, the weight of the revelation pressing down on them. But then Sarah wiped her eyes and looked at Michael. There was a fire in her gaze now, something stronger than the shock and sadness that had consumed her before.
"We can't let him get away with this," she said, her voice steady but determined. "We can't let him tear this family apart. Olivia deserves better than this. She deserves to feel safe."
Michael nodded, his chest tightening with a renewed sense of purpose.
"We'll protect her, Sarah, no matter what. We'll fix this. We'll rebuild what he tried to destroy, together."
But even as he spoke the words, Michael knew it wouldn't be that simple. Daniel hadn't just torn apart their business or their family. He had planted seeds of doubt and suspicion that would take time to root out. The damage had already been done. But Michael was ready. He would fight for his family, for Olivia's future, no matter the cost. The next day, Michael and Sarah began taking steps to confront Daniel, but they also knew that it wasn't just about confronting him, it was about reclaiming their lives. They called the police to begin tracing the offshore accounts, seeking legal advice on how to nullify Olivia's inheritance from Daniel's influence, and prepared for the fight ahead. But it wasn't just about strategy and legal tactics. It was about healing the deep wounds Daniel had caused. Olivia still struggled with the terror of that night, and Michael and Sarah both knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. But one thing was certain. They weren't going to let Daniel's betrayal define them. They were stronger than that. Spike, always by Olivia's side, became a symbol of their resilience. With every day that passed, they grew more determined, more united. And as the investigation continued, Michael realized that the most important battle wasn't going to be fought in courtrooms or financial ledgers. It would be fought in the hearts of his family. And they would win. As the weeks passed, life in the Reed household slowly began to return to some semblance of normalcy, though the scars left by Daniel's betrayal were still fresh. Michael and Sarah worked tirelessly to ensure that Olivia was shielded from the worst of it, while Spike remained ever the loyal guardian by her side. They had moved into a new rhythm, one forged by the determination to protect their daughter and rebuild their shattered trust. The legal battles were just beginning, but Michael knew that it would take more than paperwork and courtroom victories to heal the wounds Daniel had caused. The truth was, they had been shattered by a man they had loved, trusted. Michael's brother had carefully woven a web of lies and manipulation for years, and now they were left to untangle the mess. Sarah had thrown herself into sorting through the family business, trying to save what was left after Daniel's sabotage. The financial records were a maze of deceit, but with the help of a trusted advisor, they started to trace the illegal transfers and uncover the full scope of what Daniel had done. Every piece of information they uncovered seemed to pile on top of the last, but Sarah refused to back down. She was determined to restore the legacy of their family, to prove that Daniel's actions wouldn't define who they were. Michael, meanwhile, found himself spending more time with Olivia. It wasn't easy. Olivia still woke up in the middle of the night, calling out for Spike, her small frame trembling with memories of the night Daniel tried to take her. But as each day passed, Michael saw the healing happening, slowly, gently. Olivia was regaining her laughter, her sense of security, and it was all thanks to Spike. One afternoon, as Michael watched Olivia and Spike playing in the backyard, a realization hit him hard. They hadn't just been fighting for the family's business or their reputation. They had been fighting for their peace of mind, for their future. Daniel's betrayal had robbed them of their trust, but it had also shown them the strength they had when they came together. In a way, Daniel's actions had forced them to confront their darkest fears and find the resilience to rise above them. But it was far from over. As much as Michael and Sarah were trying to rebuild, they knew that Daniel wasn't done. His lawyer had been working tirelessly to get him out on bail, claiming that the kidnapping charge was an overreaction, that Daniel was just trying to work out family issues in his own way. It was a painful reminder of how Daniel still didn't understand the damage he had done. The legal system would decide his fate, but Michael knew that no judgment from a court could heal the damage to their family's bond. One evening, as Michael and Sarah sat down to discuss their next steps, the doorbell rang. Michael hesitated before answering. They hadn't expected anyone. When he opened the door, he was met by the last person he thought he'd ever see again. Daniel. "Michael," Daniel said, his voice low and tired. "I know you're probably not ready to hear me, but I need to say something." Michael's first instinct was to slam the door in his face. After everything Daniel had done, after everything he'd put them through, how could he expect a conversation? But something stopped him. Was it the lingering questions? The need for closure? Michael didn't know. "Come in," Michael said, his voice tight. Daniel stepped into the house, his demeanor a far cry from the arrogant confidence he had once exuded. He looked broken. His shoulders slumped as though the weight of everything he had done was finally starting to sink in. The two brothers stood in silence for a moment, neither sure of what to say. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Daniel finally spoke, breaking the silence. "I don't deserve it. But I came to tell you that I'm sorry. I was wrong. I let my anger get the best of me, and I've hurt all of you, especially Olivia." Michael didn't know how to react. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times, what he would say, how he would confront Daniel. But now that it was happening, it felt different. He wanted to yell, to scream, to demand answers, but he knew this wasn't the moment for that. This wasn't about what Daniel had done. It was about what Michael could do now to move forward. "Why, Daniel?" Michael finally asked, his voice calm but full of raw emotion. "Why did you think this was the only way? Why hurt Olivia?" Daniel's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, Michael thought he saw the brother he had once known, the one who had shared childhood memories with him, the one who had been his best friend.
"I was jealous, Michael. I thought if I could get rid of you, if I could take your place, everything would be better."
But I was wrong. I was blinded by what I thought I deserved, and now I've lost everything. I lost my family. I lost my dignity. And I almost lost Olivia," Daniel said, his voice breaking. Michael stood there, listening to the broken man in front of him, and for the first time, he saw Daniel not as the person who had tried to tear his world apart, but as a man who had made a catastrophic mistake. It didn't make what he did right, but it made him human. "You've hurt a lot of people, Daniel," Michael said quietly. "But maybe there's still a chance for you to make things right, not for us, but for yourself. But for—" Daniel nodded, his face twisted in regret. "I don't know if I can make it right, but I'm willing to try." Michael didn't know what the future held for Daniel, but he knew one thing. He couldn't change the past. The betrayal would always be there, but maybe, just maybe, there was room for healing. For everyone. Days passed, and while Daniel began his path toward some kind of restitution, Michael and Sarah continued to focus on rebuilding their life with Olivia. The scars of the past would never fully disappear, but they had a new appreciation for the strength of their family. The road to recovery wasn't easy, but they had each other, and that was enough to start over. As Michael looked at Olivia and Spike, playing together in the yard, he knew one thing for sure. Family wasn't just about blood, it was about love, loyalty, and the willingness to rise above the pain. They had survived the worst, and now they could finally move forward. Thank you for following Olivia's journey and the Reed family's struggle to heal from betrayal. The path to recovery is never simple, but it's always worth it. What do you think? Do you believe Daniel can truly redeem himself, or is the damage too much to overcome? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.